The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered depot in Rico, Colorado, and Zara Owens stepped down onto the dusty street with nothing but the worn dress on her back, and a grief so fresh it still took her breath away at unexpected moments. The September afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she steadied herself against the stage wheel, one hand instinctively moving to the small swell of her belly that had only just begun to show beneath the black mourning fabric. She had left everything behind in St. Louis, selling what little furniture Thomas had provided to pay for this journey west, to a town where his brother had supposedly built a life worth inheriting. But when she had written to inform her brother-in-law of Thomas's death from pneumonia 3 months prior, no reply had come, and now she stood alone in a place that looked nothing like the prosperous mining town she had imagined. The driver was already tossing luggage down from the top of the coach, and Zara watched as a battered trunk, the only possession she had brought containing her few remaining clothes and Thomas's pocket watch, landed with a heavy thud in the dirt. She moved toward it, wondering how she would possibly carry it to wherever she was meant to go when a shadow fell across her path. "Madam, let me get that for you." The voice was deep and gentle, and when Zara looked up, she found herself staring into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that had seen better days, but there was something solid and dependable in the way he stood, like an oak tree that had weathered countless storms. "I couldn't possibly impose," Zara heard herself say, though her voice wavered with exhaustion. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, sleeping in cramped way stations and eating whatever she could afford, which was precious little. "It's no imposition," the cowboy said, already bending to lift her trunk as though it weighed nothing at all. "Name's Xander Trask. I work at the Silver Bell Ranch just outside town. You look like you could use some help, if you don't mind me saying so." Zara felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough over the past months, mourning a marriage that had been more obligation than love, mourning the future she had thought was certain, mourning the loss of the only security she had known. "Zara Owens," she managed. "I was supposed to meet my brother-in-law, Robert Owens, but I don't know where to find him." Something flickered across Xander's face, an expression she couldn't quite read. He shifted the trunk to one hip, holding it there with ease. "Robert Owens," he repeated slowly. "Madam, I'm real sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Robert passed on about 6 weeks back. Cave in at the mine." The words hit Zara like a physical blow, and she swayed on her feet. Xander immediately set down the trunk and caught her elbow, steadying her with a firm but careful grip. "Easy there," he said softly. "When did you last eat?" "I don't remember," Zara whispered, and it was the truth. Somewhere in Kansas, perhaps, or earlier that morning. Everything had blurred together into a haze of exhaustion and worry. "Right," Xander said, his voice taking on a note of quiet determination that seemed to be part of his nature. "First thing, we're getting some food into you. Then we'll figure out the rest." He picked up her trunk again and started walking down the main street, clearly expecting her to follow. Zara hesitated for only a moment before her feet began to move. What choice did she have? She had $17.30 to her name, a child growing in her womb, and nowhere else to turn. If this stranger was willing to help her, even for an hour or two, she would accept that grace with what dignity she could muster. The restaurant he led her to was a modest establishment called Mabel's, with checkered curtains in the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting out into the street. Xander held the door open for her, and Zara stepped inside, acutely aware of how she must look in her dusty, wrinkled morning dress, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins in wild tendrils. A plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from behind the counter. "Xander Trask, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town for near on 2 weeks. Been busy with the cattle, Mabel," Xander said, guiding Zara to a table near the window. He set her trunk down carefully against the wall. "This here is Zara Owens. She just arrived from St. Louis, and she needs a good meal and probably a place to stay. What have you got cooking?" Mabel's sharp eyes took in Zara's condition in an instant, the widow's weeds, the exhaustion, the protective way her hand rested on her stomach. Her expression softened. "Oh, honey, you sit yourself down right now. I've got beef stew that'll stick to your ribs and fresh bread and apple pie if you've got room for it." "I can pay," Zara said quickly, though the thought of spending any of her precious dollars made her stomach clench with anxiety. "We'll worry about that later," Mabel said briskly. "Right now you need to eat." Xander pulled out a chair for Zara, and she sank into it gratefully. He took the seat across from her, removing his hat and setting it on the empty chair beside him. His hair was indeed too long, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than she had first thought. Perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "I'm sorry about your husband," Xander said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with genuine sympathy. "And about Robert, that's a lot of loss to carry." Zara swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "Thank you. I barely knew Robert. He and Thomas weren't close. But he was the only family I had left, or thought I had." Mabel appeared with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of bread that was still warm from the oven. The smell made Zara's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger, and she had to force herself not to fall on the food like a starving animal. Instead, she picked up her spoon with shaking hands and took a small, careful bite. The stew was rich and savory, thick with tender chunks of beef and vegetables, and it was the best thing Zara had tasted in months. She ate slowly at first, then more quickly as her body demanded fuel. Xander ate his own meal in silence, not watching her directly but clearly keeping an eye on her, making sure she was all right. When Mabel came back with the pie, Zara had finished every drop of her stew and 3 thick slices of bread. Color had returned to her cheeks, and she felt almost human again, though the weight of her situation still pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Feeling better?" Xander asked, and there was warmth in his voice that made something in Zara's chest ache with longing for kindness, for human connection, for anything that felt like safety. "Much better, thank you," she said. "I'm sorry to be such trouble. You must have other things to do today." Xander shrugged. "Nothing that can't wait. I was just in town to pick up supplies for the ranch, but that can take an hour or 2 longer. First thing is to figure out where you're staying tonight. Is there a boarding house?" Zara asked, though she already knew that even the cheapest room would eat into her small savings at an alarming rate. "There is, but it's not what you'd call respectable," Mabel said, setting down the pie. She hesitated, then pulled up a chair and sat down with them, her expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Henderson runs it, and she mostly caters to minors and gamblers. Not a fit place for a lady in your condition." Zara felt her last hope crumbling. "I see. Is there anywhere else?" Mabel and Xander exchanged a long look, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Mabel spoke. "My daughter Clara lives about a mile outside town with her husband and their 2 little ones. She's been feeling poorly with this pregnancy, her 3rd, and she could use some help around the house. If you were willing to work for room and board, I think it might suit you both." Pride warred with desperation in Zara's chest. She had never worked as hired help before. Thomas had been a clerk in a shipping office, and while they had never been wealthy, they had maintained a certain respectability. But what was pride worth now when she was homeless and pregnant and alone in a strange town? "I'm a hard worker," Zara said quietly. "I can cook and clean and do mending. I would be grateful for the opportunity." "Good," Mabel said, patting her hand. "I'll send word to Clara this afternoon. In the meantime, you can rest in the room above the restaurant. It's where I stay sometimes when I work late." Xander cleared his throat. "I could drive her out to Clara's place in my wagon, if you think that would be all right. Save you the trouble of getting word out there." "That's kind of you, Xander," Mabel said, and there was a knowing look in her eyes that made Zara wonder what the older woman was thinking. After the meal, which Mabel refused to let Zara pay for, Xander helped her up the narrow stairs to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. He set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "You rest for a bit," he said. "I'll get my supplies loaded and come back in an hour or so. Clara's place is about a 40-minute drive, and we should get there before dark." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zara asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Xander looked at her for a long moment, his brown eyes serious. "My mother died when I was 10, he said finally. "My father took to drink after that, and I ended up on my own at 14, working whatever jobs I could find. I know what it's like to be alone and scared, and I know what it means when someone reaches out a hand. I guess I figure it's my turn to be that hand for someone else." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. "Get some rest, Mrs. Owens. I'll be back soon." After he left, Zara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry, great shuddering sobs that she had been holding back since she stepped off the stage. She cried for Thomas, who had been a decent man even if she had never loved him the way the romantic novels she had read as a girl promised love could be. She cried for the baby inside her, who would never know its father. She cried for herself, for the life she had lost and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. And when the tears finally stopped, she washed her face at the basin, smoothed her hair as best she could, and lay down on the bed to wait. True to his word, Xander returned in just over an hour, knocking softly on the door. Zara had dozed a little, and she felt more rested than she had in days. Together, they carried her trunk down the stairs, where Xander loaded it into the back of a sturdy wagon already half full of sacks of grain and other supplies. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. Zara took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers, and climbed up beside him. The wagon lurched into motion, and they headed out of Rico's main street toward the open country beyond. The landscape around them was breathtaking in its rugged beauty. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already touched with early snow, and the valley spread out in shades of gold and amber as the aspens turned for autumn. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the smoke and coal dust of St. Louis. "It's beautiful here," Zara said softly, and she meant it. "It is," Xander agreed. "Hard country, but beautiful. The winters can be brutal and the mining is dangerous work, but there's something about this place that gets into your bones. I came out here 4 years ago from Texas, and I can't imagine being anywhere else now." "What brought you north?" Zara asked, curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Xander was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "My father died," he said finally. "There was nothing left for me in Texas but bad memories and debt. I heard the Silver Bell was hiring and I figured I'd try my hand at ranch work. Turned out I had a knack for it. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, he's a good man, treats his workers fair, pays on time. I've been able to save a little money even. Do you have other family? Zara asked. No, madam, just me. What about you? Zara shook her head. My parents died of cholera when I was 18. Thomas was a friend of my father's from the church. He offered to marry me to give me security. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Did you love him? The question was gentle, without judgment. Zara considered lying, but something about Xander's quiet presence made her want to be honest. I cared for him. He was kind to me in his way. But no, I didn't love him the way a wife should love a husband. I think he knew that, and it made him sad sometimes, but he never blamed me for it. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking and rattling over the rough road. Zara found herself watching Xander from the corner of her eye, noting the way he sat easy in the seat, the confident way he handled the horses, the strength evident in his frame. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, but it was more than that. There was something fundamentally decent about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her parents died. Clara's house came into view as they rounded a bend, a modest but well-kept cabin with smoke rising from the chimney and a fenced yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. A man was chopping wood near the barn, and he straightened as the wagon approached, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Xander pulled the wagon to a stop, and the man, who looked to be in his early 30s with sandy hair and a weathered face, walked over to meet them. "Xander Trask," he said with a grin. "Haven't seen you in a while. What brings you out this way?" "Hey, Ben," Xander said, jumping down from the wagon seat and offering his hand. "This is Zara Owens." Her mother-in-law, Mabel, thought Clara could use some help around the place, what with the baby coming and all. Ben's expression shifted to one of interest and relief. "Is that so?" "Well, Clara's been struggling something fierce with this pregnancy. She could surely use a hand." He turned to Zara, who was still sitting in the wagon, and his eyes were kind. "Welcome, Mrs. Owens. Let me help you down." Xander was already there, though, reaching up to steady Zara as she climbed down. His hands were warm and sure, and Zara felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. The front door of the cabin opened, and a young woman stepped out, her hand pressed to the small of her back. She was perhaps 25, with her mother's kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her belly was round with pregnancy, clearly more advanced than Zara's own. "Mama sent word you might be coming," Clara called out, though she looked puzzled. "But I didn't expect you so soon." "Xander, did you fly here on wings?" Xander grinned, the expression transforming his serious face into something boyish and charming. "Just good timing. Mrs. Owens here arrived on the afternoon stage, and your mama thought you two might be able to help each other out." Clara walked over slowly, moving with the careful waddle of late pregnancy. She studied Zara with sharp but not unkind eyes, taking in the morning dress and the telltale swell of her belly. "You're expecting too," she said simply. "Yes," Zara said. "Due in March, I think." "I'm due in November," Clara said. "Lord, but I'm tired of being pregnant. Come on inside and we'll talk. Ben, help Xander with her trunk, would you?" The interior of the cabin was warm and cozy, with handmade quilts on the furniture and children's toys scattered across the floor. A little girl of about 3 was playing with wooden blocks near the fireplace, and a boy, perhaps 5 years old, was sitting at the table carefully drawing on a slate. "That's Lucy and Samuel," Clara said, easing herself into a rocking chair with a sigh of relief. "They're good children, mostly, but they're a handful. Sit down, please. You must be exhausted." Zara sat, feeling the weight of the day settling over her like a heavy blanket. Through the window, she could see Xander and Ben unloading her trunk, their voices a low murmur she could not quite make out. "Mama told me about Robert," Clara said gently. I'm sorry for your loss. He was a good man, even if he didn't always make the best choices. The mine took too many good men this summer. I never met him, Zara admitted. I only knew of him through my husband's letters, and those stopped coming years ago, Clara nodded. Robert had a hard time with the drink after his wife left him. That was 2 years back. She ran off with a gambler, left him with nothing but bills and heartache. He tried to make a go of it in the mines, but the work was too dangerous, especially for a man who wasn't always sober. She paused, her hand rubbing her belly absently. But that's not your burden to carry. Mama says you need work and I need help. If you're willing to cook and clean and look after the children sometimes, I can offer you room and board. It's not much, but it's honest. I'm willing, Zara said immediately. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Good, Clara said with a smile. You can have the small room off the kitchen. It's not large, but it's private, and it has a decent bed. We'll work out the details as we go, but I think we'll manage just fine. The door opened, and Xander and Ben came in carrying the trunk between them. They set it down in the hallway, and Xander straightened, brushing dust from his hands. All settled? He asked, looking at Zara. Yes, she said, standing. Thank you for everything, Mr. Trask. I don't know what I would have done without your help today. Xander's ears turned slightly red, as though he was unused to gratitude. It was nothing, madam. You take care of yourself, all right. He settled his hat on his head and turned to go, and Zara felt a sudden, irrational panic at the thought of him leaving. He was the only person she knew in this entire territory, the only familiar face in a sea of strangers. Will I see you again? The words came out before she could stop them, and she felt her own cheeks flush with embarrassment. Xander paused in the doorway, turning back to look at her. A slow smile spread across his face, warm and genuine. I expect so, he said. I come into town most Saturdays for supplies, and I usually stop by Mabel's for a meal. Maybe I'll see you there sometime. After he left, Clara gave Zara a speculative look. Xander Trask is one of the good ones, she said quietly. Decent through and through, hard to find in these parts. Zara did not trust herself to respond, so she simply nodded and asked to see her room. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both exhausting and comforting. Zara rose early to cook breakfast for the family, then spent her mornings cleaning and doing laundry while Clara supervised the children. In the afternoons, she helped with mending or baking, and in the evenings, she played with Lucy and Samuel while Clara rested her swollen feet. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done in St. Louis, but it was also satisfying in a way her old life had never been. She was useful here, needed, and that gave her a sense of purpose she had been lacking. Ben was a quiet man, kind but reserved, who worked his small farm with steady determination. He had 40 acres that he was trying to cultivate for hay and vegetables, and he supplemented his income by working part-time at one of the smaller mines. He treated Zara with respectful courtesy, never prying into her past or making her feel like a charity case. Clara, on the other hand, was warm and talkative, happy to have another woman to share the work and the conversation. She told Zara stories about Rico, about the boom that had brought hundreds of miners to the area in the late 1870s, and the busts that had driven many away. She talked about her own life, growing up as Mabel's daughter in a succession of frontier towns, meeting Ben at a church social, building this life together from nothing. It's not easy out here, Clara said one afternoon as they kneaded bread together at the kitchen table, their hands working in rhythm. The winters are hard and the isolation can be harder, but there's a freedom in it too. We make our own way, answer to nobody but ourselves. I like that. Zara nodded, though she was not sure she felt the same freedom. Her future still seemed uncertain, shadowed by the reality of the child growing inside her and her complete lack of resources. But she was grateful for this respite, for the chance to catch her breath and figure out what came next. Saturday arrived, and Clara insisted that Zara come into town with her to visit Mabel and pick up some fabric for baby clothes. Ben hitched up the wagon, and they made the journey into Rico with the children bouncing excitedly in the back. Mabel's restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, but the older woman's face lit up when she saw them come in. She hugged Clara carefully, mindful of her daughter's pregnant belly, and then surprised Zara by hugging her too. "You look better," Mabel said approvingly, studying Zara's face. "Got some color in your cheeks. Clara working you too hard?" "Not at all," Zara said quickly. "She's been wonderful to me." They ordered soup and sandwiches, and while they ate, Zara found her eyes drifting to the window, watching the street outside. She told herself she was not looking for anyone in particular, but when a familiar wagon rolled into view and Xander Trask climbed down, her heart gave a traitorous leap. He came into the restaurant a few minutes later, his hat in his hands, and his eyes found Zara immediately. "Mrs. Owens," he said, nodding politely. "Clara, good to see you. Mabel, I'm hoping you've got some of that roast chicken left." "For you always," Mabel said with a wink. "Sit yourself down." Xander took a table near them, and after Mabel brought his food, he struck up a conversation with Clara about her pregnancy and the farm. But Zara noticed that his gaze kept straying to her, and every time their eyes met, she felt that same flutter in her chest. When the meal was finished and Clara was busy picking out fabric at the general store next door, Xander appeared at Zara's elbow. "Would you take a walk with me?" he asked quietly. "Just around the block. I promise to have you back before Clara even notices you're gone." Zara knew she should say no. She was a recent widow, pregnant with another man's child, in no position to be taking walks with cowboys, no matter how kind they had been to her. But she found herself nodding, and they stepped out into the bright September afternoon together. They walked in silence for a moment, and then Xander said, "How are you settling in? Clara treating you well?" "Very well," Zara said. "Everyone has been so kind, I still can hardly believe it." "People out here look after their own," Xander said. "You're part of the community now, whether you planned on it or not." They reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and Xander paused, looking out at the mountains. "I've been thinking about you," he said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice. "Wondering if you were all right, if you needed anything." Zara's breath caught. "That's kind of you." "It's not just kindness," Xander said, turning to look at her. His brown eyes were intense, searching her face. "I know this probably isn't the right time, and I know you've got a lot on your mind, but I want to be honest with you. I felt something when I saw you step off that stage, and it hasn't gone away. I'd like to get to know you better if you're willing." Zara stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of more pain, more loss. But another part of her, a part she had thought died with Thomas, was drawn to this man with his quiet strength and honest eyes. "I'm pregnant with another man's child," she said bluntly. "I have nothing to offer you, no money, no prospects, nothing." "I'm not asking for anything," Xander said gently. "I'm just asking for a chance to know you. We can take it slow, see where it goes. No promises, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." Zara took a shaky breath. "All right," she said. "We can try." Xander's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's all I'm asking." They walked back to the restaurant, and if Mabel or Clara noticed anything different about Zara, they were kind enough not to mention it. Over the next weeks, a pattern emerged. Xander came to town every Saturday, and after he finished his business, he would stop by Clara's place on his way back to the ranch. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a ribbon for Lucy's hair, a carved horse for Samuel, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden. He always stayed for supper, and after the meal, he and Zara would sit on the porch and talk while the sun set over the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing. Xander told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the pain of losing his mother and then his father. Zara shared her own stories about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents and their devotion to each other, about the loneliness of her marriage to Thomas. "He was a good man," Zara said one evening, her hand resting on her belly, which had grown noticeably rounder as October gave way to November. "But we were never really partners, you know. It was more like we were two people living separate lives in the same house." "That must have been lonely," Xander said softly. "It was," Zara admitted. "But I didn't realize how lonely until I came here, until I met people who actually seemed to care about me." Xander reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. "I care about you," he said. "More than I probably should, considering how little time we've known each other." Zara squeezed his hand, her heart pounding. "I care about you too." They sat in silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast Colorado sky. Clara's baby came in mid-November, a healthy boy they named Thomas. And for 2 weeks the household was chaos as they adjusted to the new addition. Zara threw herself into helping, cooking and cleaning and looking after Lucy and Samuel, so Clara could rest and recover. It was exhausting work, but it also gave Zara a glimpse of what motherhood would be like, and she found herself both terrified and excited. Xander came to visit the day after the baby was born, bringing a beautifully carved wooden cradle he had made himself in the evenings at the ranch. Clara cried when she saw it, and Ben shook Xander's hand with real emotion. "This is too much," Clara said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You shouldn't have." "I wanted to," Xander said simply. He glanced at Zara, and she saw the unspoken message in his eyes. He had made this cradle thinking not just of Clara's baby, but of hers too. As winter settled over Rico in earnest, Zara's pregnancy became impossible to hide. She was 5 months along now, her belly round and firm, and she felt the baby move for the first time on a snowy December afternoon. The sensation was strange and wonderful, a flutter like butterfly wings deep inside her, and she immediately wanted to share it with someone. That evening, when Xander came for his weekly visit, she took his hand and pressed it to her belly. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." They stood there together in the kitchen, Clara and Ben tactfully disappearing into the other room, and after a moment the baby moved again. Xander's eyes went wide with wonder. "That's your baby," he breathed. "That's a real person in there." "I know," Zara said, tears pricking her eyes. "It's starting to feel real now." Xander looked at her, his hand still pressed to her belly, and said, "Zara, I need to tell you something. I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast, and I know the timing is all wrong, but I can't help it. And I want you to know that I'm going to be here for you, for both of you, if you'll let me." Zara's tears spilled over. "Xander, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," Xander said, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "I just needed you to know how I feel." But Zara shook her head. "I do know what to say. I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't think I could feel this way about anyone, but you've shown me what it means to be truly cared for, and it scares me because I have so much to lose." "You won't lose me," Xander said fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and Zara felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. This was what love was supposed to feel like. This warmth, this certainty, this sense of coming home. Christmas came, and Mabel invited the whole extended family, such as it was, to her apartment above the restaurant for dinner. Zara helped cook a feast of roast turkey and all the trimmings, and they squeezed around Mabel's small table. Clara and Ben and their children, Mabel, Zara, and Xander, who had been given the day off from the ranch. It was the first Christmas since her parents died that Zara had felt truly happy, surrounded by people who had become family to her. When Xander gave her a gift, a beautiful shawl he had bought from a traveling merchant, she cried and kissed him in front of everyone, not caring what they thought. Mabel just smiled and said, "About time you two stopped tiptoeing around each other." The winter deepened, and Zara's belly grew larger. She was nearly 7 months along by January 1880, and the baby kicked constantly, especially at night. Xander visited whenever he could, sometimes braving snowstorms to make the journey from the ranch, and they talked seriously about the future. "I want to marry you," Xander said one evening in late January as they sat by the fire in Clara's front room. "I want to give your baby my name, raise it as my own. But I know you might not be ready for that, and I'll wait as long as you need." Zara had been thinking about this for weeks, turning it over in her mind from every angle. She knew what people would say, that she was a fortune hunter, a woman with no prospects latching onto the first man who showed her kindness. But she also knew her own heart, and she knew Xander's, and she believed in what they had found together. "I want to marry you too," she said quietly. "But I need you to understand what you're taking on. This baby isn't yours. People will talk. And I don't know what kind of mother I'll be or wife after everything that's happened." "I don't care what people say," Xander said. "And as far as I'm concerned, any child you carry is mine in every way that matters. We'll figure out the rest together." They were married in February, in Mabel's restaurant with Clara and Ben and the children as witnesses. Zara wore a simple blue dress that Clara had altered to fit over her pregnant belly, and Xander wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut and his face shining with joy. The local minister performed the ceremony, and when Xander kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the room. "I've got a surprise for you," Xander said after the brief celebration. "Come with me." He led Zara outside, where a wagon was waiting, and drove her out of town to a piece of land about 3 miles from the Silver Bell Ranch. There, nestled in a clearing with mountains rising behind it and a stream running nearby, was a small cabin, rough but sturdy, with a stone chimney and glass windows. "I've been building it for the past 2 months," Xander said, helping Zara down from the wagon. "It's not much yet, but it's ours. Mr. Sullivan sold me this parcel, 20 acres, and I've been working on it every spare moment I have. There's still a lot to do, but I thought we could move in by the time the baby comes." Zara walked through the cabin in a daze, taking in the single large room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain, the simple kitchen with a real stove, the cradle Xander had made sitting ready beside the bed. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's home." They spent the next few weeks preparing for the baby and finishing the cabin. Xander worked on building furniture when he was not at the ranch, and Zara sewed curtains and baby clothes, helped by Clara and Mabel. The community rallied around them, bringing gifts of blankets and diapers and food, welcoming them as a proper married couple. Zara moved into the cabin in early March, when she was just over 8 months pregnant. It was strange to have a home of her own, a place that belonged to her and Xander and no one else. The first night, they lay in bed together, Xander's hand on her belly feeling the baby kick, and Zara felt a peace she had never known before. "Are you happy?" Xander asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zara said honestly. "You saved my life, you know. When I stepped off that stage, I had nothing and no one. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Xander said, kissing her forehead. "You gave me a reason to build something, to have a future worth planning for. I love you, Zara Trask." "I love you too," Zara said, and it was the truest thing she had ever spoken. The baby came 3 weeks later, on a warm March afternoon when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom on the hillsides. Clara came to help with the birth, along with a midwife from town, and after 12 hours of labor, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy with dark hair and a loud cry. Xander was there through all of it, holding Zara's hand and wiping her forehead and telling her she was doing wonderfully. When the midwife placed the baby in Zara's arms, he leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He's beautiful," Xander said. "He's perfect. What should we name him?" Zara asked, stroking the baby's soft cheek. Xander thought for a moment. "How about we name him after your father? What was his name?" "William," Zara said, her voice breaking. "His name was William." "William Trask," Xander said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, William." The baby became the center of their world. Xander proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. He never once treated William as anything other than his own son, and watching him with the baby, Zara fell even more deeply in love with her husband. The spring turned to summer, and their little homestead began to take shape. Xander planted a vegetable garden and built a chicken coop, and Zara tended both while caring for William. Mr. Sullivan came to visit one day and was so impressed with Xander's work on the cabin that he offered him a promotion to foreman, with a significant increase in pay. "It means I'll have more responsibility," Xander told Zara that night, "but also more security. We'll be able to save money, maybe buy more land eventually." "I'm so proud of you," Zara said, kissing him. "You've worked so hard for this." Life settled into a rhythm of work and love and small joys. William grew from an infant to a chubby, happy baby who laughed at everything and adored his father. Mabel visited often, bringing food and news from town, and Clara and her family came for Sunday dinners whenever they could. On their first anniversary, Xander gave Zara a gold locket with a tiny portrait of William inside. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of how far we've come," he said. "A year ago, we barely knew each other. Now I can't imagine my life without you." Zara cried and kissed him and told him he was the best husband and father a woman could ask for. That summer, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. She told Xander one evening after they had put William to bed, and he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with joy. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby this time made from love." "They're both our babies," Zara corrected gently. "William is yours just as much as this one will be." "I know," Xander said, kissing her, "but you know what I mean. This one we made together." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Zara was no longer alone and afraid. She felt healthy and strong, and Xander doted on her even more than before. He expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom so the children would have their own space, and he built more furniture, including a beautiful dining table where they could eat as a family. In February of 1881, nearly 2 years after Zara had stepped off that stage in Rico with nothing but grief and fear, she gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter this time, and when the baby girl was placed in her arms, Zara looked up at Xander with exhausted joy. "She has your eyes," she said softly. Xander stared at his daughter in wonder, tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect. What should we call her?" "I was thinking Rose," Zara said. "After your mother." Xander's breath caught. He had told Zara once months ago that his mother's name had been Rose and that he still missed her every day. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," Zara said. "Rose Trask, I think it's beautiful." William, who was almost 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, singing to her in his toddler babble and bringing her his favorite toys to look at. Watching her two children together, Zara felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. Life on the homestead was not always easy. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, summers when the garden struggled in the heat, illnesses and injuries and setbacks. But through it all, Zara and Xander faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Mr. Sullivan eventually made Xander a partner in the ranch, giving him a share of the profits in recognition of his hard work and dedication. With the additional income, they were able to buy more land, expanding their homestead to nearly 100 acres. Xander hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, and they built a proper barn and corrals. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved animals and spent every spare moment following his father around the ranch. Rose was a bright, cheerful child who adored her brother and had her father wrapped around her little finger. Watching Xander with the children, no one would ever guess that William was not his biological son. He loved them equally and completely, and they adored him in return. In 1884, when William was 5 and Rose was 3, Zara gave birth to twin boys, much to everyone's surprise and delight. They named them Jacob and Joshua, and the household descended into cheerful chaos as they adjusted to having 4 children under the age of 6. "We're going to need a bigger house," Xander said one evening, looking around at the overflowing cabin with a mixture of exhaustion and love. "We are," Zara agreed, bouncing one of the twins on her hip while Rose tugged at her skirt and William helped set the table for dinner. "But I wouldn't trade this chaos for anything in the world." Over the next few years, Xander built them a proper house, a beautiful 2-story structure with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for all the children and more to come. The original cabin became a guest house, and Mabel moved in there after she retired from running the restaurant, happy to spend her final years surrounded by her extended family. The children grew and thrived. William showed an early talent for working with animals and announced at age 8 that he wanted to be a veterinarian, a profession that fascinated him after he watched the traveling vet treat one of their horses. Xander and Zara scrimped and saved to make sure he would have the education he needed. Rose was bright and quick, learning to read before she started school and devouring every book she could get her hands on. The twins were mischievous and inseparable, always getting into trouble but impossible to stay mad at. In 1887, Zara gave birth to their 5th child, another daughter they named Grace. By this time, the Trask family was well known and respected throughout the region. Xander had become one of the most successful ranchers in Colorado, known for his fair dealing and his excellent horses. Zara was beloved for her kindness and her involvement in the community, organizing school fundraisers and helping new families get settled. But despite their success and growing family, they never forgot where they had started. Every year on the anniversary of the day, Zara stepped off the stage in Rico. They would visit the spot where the old depot had stood, holding hands and remembering. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked one such anniversary when they had been married for nearly a decade. "Coming here, marrying me, all of it?" Zara looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. You took a broken, frightened woman with nothing to her name and gave her a life beyond her wildest dreams. How could I ever regret that?" "I think I got the better end of the deal," Xander said, pulling her close. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me love." They kissed there in the spring sunshine, and when they returned home, their children ran out to greet them, all 5 of them shouting and laughing and demanding attention. Xander swept the youngest ones up in his arms while the older children hugged Zara, and they went inside together, a family bound by love rather than blood, but no less real for that. As the years passed, the Trask family continued to grow and prosper. William did indeed become a veterinarian, one of the first in the region, and he took over the animal care for the ranch as well as treating animals for neighboring homesteads. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school on their property for the children of ranch workers and nearby families. The twins went into ranching with their father, learning everything he had to teach them about breeding horses and managing livestock. Grace, the baby of the family, showed an early talent for music and would play the piano Xander bought her for hours, filling their home with beautiful melodies. In 1895, when Zara was 37 and Xander 41, they celebrated their 15th anniversary with a party that brought together everyone who had helped them along the way. Clara and Ben were there with their grown children, Mabel, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, and friends and neighbors from all over the county. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Xander led Zara away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking their land. The house, the barns, the corrals full of horses, the fields green with crops and hay, all of it spread out before them like a testament to what they had built together. "I've been thinking about that first day," Xander said, his arm around Zara's waist. "When you stepped off that stage looking so lost and alone, I knew the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how much." "I had nothing," Zara said softly, leaning into him. "Nothing but grief and fear and a child I didn't know how to raise alone. And you looked at me and saw someone worth saving." "I saw someone worth loving," Xander corrected, "and I was right." They stood together as the stars came out, the sounds of their children and grandchildren, for William had married and had a baby of his own, drifting to them on the evening breeze. It was a life neither of them could have imagined 15 years ago, built on a foundation of kindness and trust and love that had only deepened with time. "Thank you," Zara whispered, "for carrying my trunk that day, for never leaving." "Thank you," Xander replied, "for letting me stay." As they walked back to the party hand in hand, Zara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the desperate widow stepping off a stage in a strange town to the woman she had become, surrounded by love and family and a future bright with promise. It had not been an easy road, but every hardship had been worth it for this, for the life she and Xander had created together. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and laughter that echoed across their land. And when everyone had finally gone home and the children were in bed, Zara and Xander sat on their porch, watching the moon rise over the mountains, content in the knowledge that they had found what so many spent their whole lives searching for. They had found home. They had found love. They had found each other. Years continued to pass in the way they do when life is full and rich, marked not by dramatic events, but by the steady accumulation of small joys and everyday miracles. The Trask Ranch became legendary in the region, known for producing the finest horses in Colorado and for the family who ran it with integrity and kindness. William's veterinary practice flourished, and he married a sweet-natured woman named Elizabeth who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They had 3 children, giving Zara and Xander their first grandchildren and filling the ranch with another generation of laughter and love. Rose continued teaching, and though she had several suitors over the years, She seemed content with her independence and her work. She lived in a small cottage on the ranch property, close enough to visit daily but far enough to have her own space, and she doted on her nieces and nephews with the fierce love of a favorite aunt. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, both married within a year of each other, local girls from ranching families, and they built homes on opposite ends of the ranch property. Their wives became close friends, and their children grew up more like siblings than cousins, running wild across the ranch just as their fathers had done before them. Grace, true to her musical talent, eventually went to Denver to study at a music conservatory, but she returned home every summer and for Christmas, filling the house with music and stories of city life that fascinated her younger nieces and nephews. Through all of it, Zara and Xander remained the steady center, the foundation on which the entire family was built. They were the ones everyone came to with problems and joys, the ones who offered advice and comfort and unconditional love. Their marriage had become the standard by which all the younger generation measured their own relationships, a testament to what real partnership could look like. On their 20th anniversary in 1900, as the old century gave way to the new, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Zara was 42 now, her dark blonde hair streaked with silver, and Xander was 46, his face lined by sun and weather but his eyes as warm and loving as they had been the day they met. 20 years, Xander said in his vows, his voice thick with emotion, and I love you more today than I did the day we married. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest blessing. I promise to love you for 20 more years and 20 after that, and for however many years God grants us together. You saved my life, Zara said, tears streaming down her face, and then you made it worth living. You took a frightened widow and her unborn child and gave us a home, a family, a future beyond imagining. I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I breathe. There was not a dry eye in the house when they kissed, sealing their vows again, and the celebration that followed was one the family would talk about for years to come. As Zara and Xander entered their later years, they gradually began to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, turning more responsibilities over to their sons while they focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They traveled a little, visiting Denver to see Grace perform in concerts, taking a trip to St. Louis so Zara could show Xander where she had grown up. But mostly they were content to stay home, sitting on their porch in the evenings and watching the sun set over the mountains, counting their blessings and marveling at how far they had come from that September day in 1879, when a pregnant widow stepped off a stage with nothing and a cowboy carried her trunk and changed both their lives forever. Do you remember, Zara said one evening when they were in their 60s, surrounded by children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner, how scared I was that first day. I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to live for. I remember, Xander said, squeezing her hand. And look at you now. Look at all of this. He gestured at the scene around them, the beautiful house they had built, the thriving ranch, the family they had created. You had everything to live for. You just didn't know it yet. Neither did you, Zara said softly. You were alone, saving every penny, working yourself to the bone. And then you saw a stranger in trouble and you helped her, even though you had no reason to. I had every reason to, Xander said. The moment I saw you, something in me knew. I can't explain it any better than that. I just knew you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family, and Zara felt a profound gratitude for every moment of this unexpected life. Thomas had been a good man, and she honored his memory, But what she had with Xander was something she had not even known was possible. This was love in its truest form, built on respect and partnership, and a deep, abiding affection that had only grown stronger through decades of facing life together. William came over with his youngest daughter, a bright-eyed girl of 8 who adored her grandparents. "Grandpa, tell us the story again," she begged. "About how you met." It was a story the children never tired of, and Zara smiled, pulling her granddaughter onto her lap. "Well," she began, "it was a beautiful September day in 1879, and I had just arrived in Rico on the afternoon stage. I was all alone in the world, or so I thought, carrying nothing but a trunk full of old clothes and a heart full of grief. And then Grandpa saw you," the little girl said, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again anyway. "And then I saw her," Xander continued, his eyes twinkling. "The most beautiful, bravest woman I had ever laid eyes on, and I knew right then that I had to help her, had to make sure she was all right. So he carried my trunk," Zara said, "and he never left." "Never left," Xander confirmed, kissing Zara's cheek. "Best decision I ever made." The family gathered closer, the older children who knew the story well and the younger ones hearing it for the first time. And as Zara and Xander recounted their early days together, the kindness of strangers who became family, the struggles and triumphs of building a life from nothing, they watched their legacy spread out before them in the faces of their children and grandchildren. This was what they had created together. Not just a successful ranch or a beautiful home, but a family bound by love, a legacy of kindness and hard work and unwavering devotion. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible, and it had all started with a simple act of compassion on a dusty street in a small Colorado town. As the evening wore on, and the family eventually dispersed to their own homes, Zara and Xander remained on the porch, as was their custom. The stars were coming out, brilliant against the dark sky, and the mountains rose like sentinels in the distance. "No regrets?" Xander asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Zara replied, as she always did. "You." "Only that I didn't meet you sooner," Xander said, pulling her close. "But then again, maybe we met exactly when we were supposed to. Maybe everything that came before was just preparing us for each other." Zara rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and the soap he used. "I think you're right," she said softly. "I think we were always meant to find each other, even if it took a long and difficult road to get there." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, they were content to simply be together, grateful for every moment they had been given and every moment still to come. The years ahead would bring their share of sorrows. They would lose Mabel to old age, and then Clara to a sudden illness that took her too soon. They would bury friends and see their children face their own hardships and heartbreaks. But through it all, they would have each other, and that would be enough. Xander passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Zara holding his hand, and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "Thank you for letting me love you," and Zara kissed him and told him she would see him again someday. She lived another 5 years after that, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, telling stories about their father to anyone who would listen, making sure that the legacy of his kindness and strength lived on. On the morning of her death, at the age of 78, Zara woke early and walked out to the old cabin where she had first lived with Xander. It was maintained now as a sort of family museum, filled with artifacts from their early days together. She sat in the rocking chair Xander had made for her when she was pregnant with William, and she thought about everything they had shared. William found her there an hour later, a peaceful smile on her face, gone to join the man who had carried her trunk that long ago September day and never left her side. They buried her next to Xander on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and at the funeral, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told stories of a love that had transcended circumstance and created something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the next generation, and then the one after that. The story of how it all began, of a pregnant widow who stepped off a stage with nothing and a cowboy who carried her trunk and gave her everything, became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But to those who had known Zara and Xander, it was not a myth. It was simply the truth of what love could be when two people committed to facing life together, supporting each other through every hardship, and choosing each other every single day. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of a love built on respect, trust, and genuine affection. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew down from the mountains, ranch hands swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the big house, holding hands and watching the sunset, well, no one was surprised. Some loves were simply too strong to be contained by something as insignificant as death. Some loves were meant to last forever, echoing through generations as a reminder of what was possible when two people were brave enough to take a chance on each other. The Trask Ranch stood as a monument to that love, a place where family was cherished above all else, where strangers were welcomed and helped, where the values of hard work and integrity and compassion were passed down from one generation to the next. And at the heart of it all was the story of a September day in 1879, when a pregnant widow stepped off a stage in Rico, Colorado, with nothing but her grief and her courage, and a cowboy named Xander Trask carried her trunk and gave her a love that would last through eternity. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, dramatic and heartfelt, filled with hardship and triumph, loss and joy. It was a story of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built a life that neither could have imagined alone. It was a story of family, of community, of the enduring power of human kindness. But most of all, it was a story of love, pure and simple and true, the kind of love that changes lives and creates legacies and reminds us all of what is possible when we open our hearts to another person and commit to walking through life together, whatever may come. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy Zara and Xander left behind. Not the ranch or the money or the success, but the example of a love so strong, so true, that it inspired everyone who witnessed it to believe in the possibility of finding that same deep connection for themselves. Their story became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or alone, a reminder that sometimes, when you least expect it, someone will carry your trunk and change your life forever. The end.